everyone, welcome to today's video. I am once again going on another trip, and today I am going to Iceland. Now Iceland, along with Ireland, is one of the premier locations for knitters and yarn users in general. So I think I was just waiting for the right trip in order to go, and I found it. The place that I'm going to is actually a ranch where not only am I going to be able to knit with other people, I'm gonna learn how to ride a horse. I haven't been on a horse since I was 10, and that was over 2 decades ago. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how this version of me copes with riding a horse. The planning for this trip was rather sudden. It was pretty short comparatively speaking. I haven't had a chance to learn any Icelandic yet, but fortunately they are familiar with English, so I should be okay. At this point, it's like the Billy Joel song, it's just a matter of trust. I got a couple of things left to pack at this point, and then I'll be on my way.
I've made it to Iceland. Apologies for the rest of this video going forward. I have been up for over 24 straight hours, and I've had half a glass of wine tonight. The combination of those two factors means that I'm not running on all cylinders here, but I know if I don't say how this day went before I go to bed, I am going to not remember how today went. And part of the reason why I went on this trip was to record what was going on. Also, it's almost 9 o'clock p.m. This is how sunny it is, being 9 o'clock p.m. The sun doesn't set until midnight, and it's gonna rise at 3 a.m. According to the pictures of one of the other people in the group, the sun doesn't fully set. Mom ended up driving me to the airport. Before we drove to the airport, we stopped by the diner to get a meal, and we were lucky in that Dad was in the process of driving on the way home today, and he met up with us at the diner. So I got a chance to actually see Dad before I disappeared for another week, for another hour. When I went through TSA was relatively straightforward, which is strange. I ended up buying some snacks and filling up my water bottle, and I had plenty of time to sit at the gate, which actually was the charging area. There were tables that just had outlets to charge the phone, which was handy. We got on the planes. There was a slight delay with the plane. The door wasn't closing, but they solved the problem. So even though there was a delay, the pilot promised to arrive at Iceland earlier by an hour. I didn't make plans to fall asleep. I had plans to sit up and watch the entire time, and most of the stuff I watched, I don't know, I just wasn't able to find the right vibe, I guess. I started with The Wizard of Oz. I had a feeling that I wanted to rewatch it, and it wasn't really vibing. The meal was good. It was a chicken rice dish with some vegetables with green beans and carrots, and they had a cookie that tasted like a birthday cake and some bread. I got to use my knitting light for the first time. I hope I didn't keep the person next to me asleep. She did have a blanket that she literally put over her head, but I did turn on only one of the lights, the light that was directed away from her, and I tried to keep it on a warmer color tone because like blue light can keep people awake. But midway through the flight, I just stopped the movie that I was watching, and I just opened the door and I looked out the window and I saw one of the most gorgeous views I've ever seen. The plane was flying above the clouds, and you could see ripples in the clouds that made them look like they were waves in the ocean. Also, the sun was starting to come up, so the sun was lighting up the sky and casting shadows in the clouds that made the different looks deeper. It was just like looking at a different type of ocean. And it's like how amazing it would be to go through that vapor, even though I know it's like 1,000,000 pounds of water vapor. If I were to actually go into that, it would just be... We landed in Iceland pretty nicely. They gave us a snack. I ended up watching a couple episodes of a show I knew I previously enjoyed just to give me the good vibes, because the movie I ended up not finishing was Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think it's called. It's the one with Michelle. I wanted to get into the concept of the movie, but I guess I just wasn't in the right mindset to watch it. I'll have to try it again later. But the thing that was most the vibe was Abbott Elementary. They had a couple episodes of Abbott Elementary, so I watched 2 that I knew I absolutely loved. Yeah, I just spent about an hour just staring out the window. I was also seated just behind the wing on one of the sides, so when the plane landed, I could actually see the baggage people unloading the bags, and they had this cute little golf cart thing. It had 3 trailers attached to it, and they were sorting them. They ended up detaching one of the trailers from the rest, and I don't know if it's because one of the trailer hitches were broken, which is a possibility because the hitches looked really rusted, or if it's because they were sorting the bags that were going to different places, ones that had transfer flights versus ones that Iceland was the final destination, and they got the transfer flights one out of Dodge before they missed their flight. The airport was a pretty smooth airport. Went through customs pretty quickly. I only had to talk to one customs officer, very stoic Nordic presenting man, and he ended up asking me where I went, and I told him Hestaland, and he ended up asking me where it was, and I gave him the best answer that I could, even though it wasn't terribly helpful because I'm still not entirely sure how to pronounce the name of the capital city. I think it's Reykjavik. He ended up asking me why I was there, and I said to ride horses and knit. He did not seem impressed, but I guess if you're working as the border guard in Iceland, you've heard people say that before. After that, I stumbled my way into the baggage claim, which went through the duty store somehow. At some point, I found myself in a room just filled with cigarette cartons, and I'm not sure how that happened. But my bag was already there, and then there was an ad right there for the fly bus, which I knew I had to catch in order to get to the bus terminal where they would pick us up. They ended up just driving us straight to the bus terminal, and we got off of the bus, and there was an hour before our van that was going to pick us up was going to arrive. I got some juice. I had a feeling I needed to drink something, and I ended up finding a juice brand I'd never seen before, so I had that. And then a little bit later on, I needed to use the restroom, and it's interesting, like the water was free. They had a water fountain saying try fresh Icelandic water, but then you had to pay to use the bathroom, and that cost like 200 kroners. I tried paying with the card twice, and the turnstile didn't let me through, so I didn't use it, and I'm sincerely hoping they didn't charge me for it because it didn't read my card. With Iceland, there's a lot of Icelandic writing, but then it's followed with English writing, but when you're trying to do the transactions on the keypad, it's all in Icelandic, so I'm relying on like the color cues to say this is acceptable versus this is not, and kind of based off of where I typically assume other things to be. I guess it's a good thing I'm not going to need it for too much more of this trip. I ended up going outside to check to see where the van was. The moment shortly after when I started asking, I found some people who ended up looking like they were headed to the same place I was. So I ended up asking, hey, are you going to Hestaland? And I was like, yeah. So we just started all gathering together on the same inside place. The people that I first ran into, I looked at them and knew the vibes were there. It's like, we're gonna get along. The entire group ended up getting there. We made it into the van, and the van had the most eye-jarring carpeting available on the seats. We know it's there to hide the dirt, but it's also just hard on the eyes. We spent over an hour driving through the Icelandic landscape. There are some things that just are really striking about Iceland. It's definitely a land of contradictions. It's known for its volcanoes, but there's literally ice on the mountains. But also coming out of the airport, this seems really flat. But then when you go further into the country, you see some mountains that are so tall that you can't see the top because the cloud cover is covering them. They have the sun up for so long in the day, but they don't necessarily see the sun because it's sunny all the time. And it was just majestic mountains everywhere. It's a very good place if you want to look at rocks. And amazingly enough, there's a lot of purple in the landscape. Kind of like how you associate Ireland with green, parts of Iceland are just coated with purple because someone once brought the lupin flower into Iceland, and it's an invasive species, so they took over everywhere. So a lot of the countryside, you have the rocks and the dirt mixing together, so you get this gray-brown mix, but then you have grass that's growing. You don't know if it's grass or if it's moss because of how far away it is, but then mixing with that grass mossy thing, you've got these lupins popping out, and they're in clusters, and they're just all over the place. And it's a very, very pretty sight. So far, my impression of Iceland is the same impression that I had of the Eiffel Tower, where you look at the media for it, and you don't know too much about it, and it's like, well, what's the big deal? But then you see it in person, it's like, ha, I get it. The weather has been absolutely beautiful too. There has been some rain today, and there have been like some chilly points, but overall, it's like a nice spring day. It's been absolutely gorgeous outside. On the way to the horse ranch, we ended up stopping by a yarn shop because we're all knitters. We were told that we could buy some of the yarn needed for the sweater cheaper in Iceland than we could have in the States, because we're using Icelandic yarn, which is pretty sticky. It's more local to here. So it's like, I decided I was going to wait till here to buy the yarn for the sweater. It was a very nice little shop too. I'm going to go into more detail about the yarn shop in a different video where I talk about the yarn of Iceland. We started seeing horses and sheep along the countryside, which was like, ooh, look at those cute animals. While we were at the yarn shop, I actually noticed someone going like, oh, look at that. Like what you would react to the cute little animal, but it was actually these flowers. I think they were primroses. I'm not entirely sure, but they were growing out of the concrete and they looked really cool. Iceland really loves their roundabouts. There were so many roundabouts and like windy. There was one bridge we went over and everyone just started reacting. And it was like, why is everyone reacting? It turns out one of the people in the group ended up having a viral video of her screaming while driving over this bridge. Is like, is this a car bridge? Is this a passenger bridge? And she thought it was funny. The internet thought it was annoying. And if I can find that video, I'm going to link it in the description box below. Then we ended up driving to the ranch, and the ranch was absolutely beautiful. We unloaded. We pretty much had lunch almost right away. And it was like a butternut squash soup with sourdough bread. I'm not typically a soup person, but it was good. And there were cookies for dessert. And I had my first taste of Icelandic water, and it was good. And then after lunch, one of the owners of the ranch brought us to the barn, and he gave us some background information about Icelandic horses. And there was quite a bit of it that I'd never heard of before. I did not realize that there was such a specific knowledge base about how horses walk. Turns out that Icelandic horses have the possibility, although not necessarily guaranteed, of being able to walk 5 different gaits. I don't remember them all, but what I do remember is that there are like 3 main gaits. There's the walk, which is the slowest, then the trot, and then the canter. Then there's 2 others. I think gallop is maybe one of them. Like one of them could be classified as a gallop. Another one is probably like the same way as a trot maybe, but it's how the horse walks. So I think with the trot, the horse has 2 feet on the ground at the same time, and they're always diagonal to each other. And there's another gait where the horse walks 1 leg at a time, like with all 4 legs, but 1 leg at a time. So it's like boom, 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 boom. Even though the canter was faster, riding horses used to be seen as a lowbrow activity, so people who had money would hook up carriages to horses, and therefore tried to have horses that were very good trotters, because the trotters led to a smoother ride with the carriage. But when the horses came over to Iceland, they didn't necessarily want the carriage horses, so they actually weeded out that activity for them. They are very protective of their horses here. There was a ban on horses being imported into Iceland about 1,000 years ago, and for some reason it's never been lifted. So the horses here have had a chance to develop naturally, and they are not vaccinated, so they are not immune to any diseases that, if we were to start importing horses, would likely affect them, much like how European settlers affected the Native Americans with smallpox. They're trying to prevent that happening to the horses. They're also trying to make sure that it stays like a pure breed. But outside of Iceland, lots of horses have to go through DNA testing. So even if we wanted to keep the pure breed, it probably would be easier now, and you wouldn't necessarily have to have the ban if it wasn't for the fact of the anti-vaccination stuff or the strange diseases, which honestly it makes a lot more sense after having lived through COVID. The horse was wearing a regular saddle, but the barn also had a side saddle. And what I didn't realize about the side saddle was that the saddle actually had a place for the woman to put one of her legs that was actually like jutting out like this. Like I thought both legs would be going down like that, but it's actually more like that. And it's like, oh, that would have been a harder position to maintain, especially in the skirts. Around this point, I was starting to really feel the fact that I was awake for a long period of time. But after the talk, we went to go pet horses. I was unsure about how to pet the horses, but I saw one of the other people pet the horse, and she had more experience with horses than I do, so I was like, oh, this is how we pet the horse. And she was often scratching them underneath the mane, which ends up being perfect for protecting your hands against the wind when you're scratching them in the middle of an open field. We saw some dogs and a cat today. I got to spend some time petting the dogs and petting the cat. It's still amazing. The dogs are not allowed inside the guest house. I guess they're allowed inside the normal house, but they're not allowed inside the guest house. And the owners here are a married couple, and they have some younger children. So their almost 6-year-old was telling me about their dogs, and she mentioned that the dogs don't really help with the horses. They're not like sheep dogs who are expected to herd the sheep. These are just like regular house dogs that get to spend time outside. We were also told that horses do get put into categories for feeding. Horses are a lot more likely to get overfed than underfed these days, but they will split into horses into their weight categories and then arrange them with their food, so that way they're not overfeeding the horses that are overweight versus making sure that the horses that are super skinny are getting food and that they're not underweight. Yeah, I ended up following some of the people down this path because I did forget how to get back to the guest house from the barn. I thought, oh, that's what she's doing. But no, they were actually going to get closer to some horses out in the field, especially one of the ones that just recently had a baby. We got close, we actually crossed over an electric fence to get into one of the pens, and inside the pen was a minefield of poop. I don't think I stepped in any that was wet. Thankfully, I got close to some horses, and there's a blue roan there that was just absolutely gorgeous. Plenty of people did get to pet the fowl. Then after we came back from that, there was a little introduction and knitting hangout together, so everyone in the group got to introduce themselves to each other, even though we'd already asked each other our names earlier. And then we all started knitting, and I was originally knitting on my plane project because I thought, oh, I'm been tired, I might not be super aware. On the way back, I did find out there was a sink in the barn, which was good because somehow my eyes became itchy and they just needed to be cleaned. But it's interesting, one of the other people in the group mentioned she likes how the dynamics are older ladies who really love horses and younger punk people. I was like, yeah, that's a fair assessment. That's actually a pretty nice combination there. It turns out a lot of people are more familiar with horse riding than knitting, which is actually the opposite of what I am. We'll get a chance to learn about horses tomorrow and learn more about knitting. And I ended up starting my knit project of the sweater that we're going to be taking our classes on, because I realized that the part that is at the very beginning is a part that I would already know how to do, lickety split, so I didn't want to spend too much time stuck at the beginning when I didn't need to be. Somewhere along the way, they got out the wine, and I ended up accepting a glass of wine because they had white wine, but also I'm a lot more likely to accept alcohol if I'm not driving and if I'm close to my bed, which means a lot of the time I drink alcohol, it's on international group trips in the hotels or where I'm staying. But we ended up having supper shortly after that. We put stitch markers on the wine glasses to tell them apart. And it was just a very nice chat, get together type of thing. And then we had supper, and supper was chicken and rice pilaf, and there was corn. Dessert had chocolate cake, a raspberry twort type of cake with homemade whipped cream. There's also a little candy nearby. It was milk duds and also licorice too. And we just spent time chatting, and that is where my day ends, because then I came in here to talk about this. So far, the people I've been interacting with are pretty cool. There's also one person, you don't think she can get any cooler, and then she mentioned something, it's wow, I was wrong. She's so cool. Also, I am incredibly thankful that I have a room to myself, because apparently everyone else is sharing. There weren't too many single rooms available, but I got a single room, and yeah, I'm looking forward to experiencing things, but after I get sleep.